Everyone, good morning. My name is Jason Baum, the President and CEO of the Sioux Falls Area Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you all to our second annual Sioux Falls Cybersecurity Conference. We're so excited to kick things off today. I want to thank you all for joining us here this morning. You know, I can remember a few years ago when cybersecurity type of attacks were kind of on the margins of the news. Didn't hear about them all that often, and now it seems like it's a weekly and almost daily occurrence that some company is being impacted by this type of activity. Recently, I was at an event with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Committee of 100. We had the great opportunity to hear our National Director of Intelligence, Dan Coates, speak. At that, I learned that even if you're going to take a business trip to China, now you're not supposed to bring your regular phone, because if you go there, turn your phone on, even on their networks, you're going to come back with malware that follows you back to this country. Every time I learn something about this topic, I get more and more terrified about what's out there, and I'm glad that I don't have a lot of secrets to keep in the first place. I'm so excited to introduce our first speaker this morning. We are so honored to have United States Senator Mike Rounds with us this morning to kick off today's events. Senator Rounds currently serves as the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Cybersecurity. As chairman, Senator Rounds works with Congress, the administration, our military personnel, and other stakeholders to develop policies that will protect the United States from damaging cyber attacks. On top of that, Senator Rounds serves on additional committees, including Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs, Veterans Affairs, and Environment and Public Works. Everyone, Senator Rounds is a tireless advocate for the business community. We have a long-standing relationship with him here in Sioux Falls and are so glad that we have him representing our interests in Washington, D.C. Please welcome our partner to the stage, United States Senator Mike Rounds.
I'm used to doing that. When you have Thune as a partner, every time you get up to speak after he's done, you bring it way down. Hey, good morning. Dreary day in Sioux Falls, and yet at the same time, you've got a discussion today that if you're here because, Alice, one of those things we ought to do for business, you may fall asleep. On the other hand, if this is one of those things where you said, you know, I've been involved in some of this stuff. I've seen some of the stuff going on out there. This is probably one of the most interesting topics and one of the most disturbing topics that you're going to learn about in terms of how to protect your business. I just want to say thank you to the Sioux Falls Chamber and to all of the other organizations that are helping to sponsor this today. This is one of the most important things that they can do to help provide businesses with good information about the challenges that they face. I remember, you know, in the 1980s, the 1990s, if you were in business and you had a computer, I remember the first computer we ever got. We decided we'd buy one, and then, you know, we'll try one out. It wasn't more than about 6 months later, there was a second one, and then pretty soon there was a whole system of them, and then that system got replaced by another system of them. But at some point, it was a matter, it wasn't just a telephone line that you could connect to, and it wasn't just the fact that you were now getting more faxes coming through. Remember the faxes coming through? And then pretty soon it was a matter of you could use your computer and you could have those computers visit with one another. And it was fascinating as this thing started to develop. But back then, the biggest challenges you had was whether or not the glitches that were there were caused by either static in a line someplace, somebody had pulled the wrong thing, there was a software change, but there was something in it that could be fixed by a local expert coming in who understood a little bit about how to install software on your system and was replacing it and figuring out ways to make things work and how the connections work. Today, that's all taken for granted. You've got folks that clearly understand the architecture behind systems. They understand the individual systems, and our software really has come a long, long way, and the updates come in and we do them automatically. They come in and they're updated. You just got to have the automatic updates and follow along with them, and suddenly all those things that were the challenges of technology have changed, and it's a part of our life. And at the same time, something else happened, because we began not just to use them, but to rely on them, and in many cases they started almost managing a lot of our business activities, and our activities kind of surrounded how that system was set up within your offices. Something else happened as well. The bad guys figured out that they could get into your system because you were connected. The old phone lines turned into digital lines, and those digital lines became accessible, and if you could figure out a way to get into somebody's system, you got into information. And you could also find ways in which you could cause problems for people. Today, more than ever, we need cybersecurity professionals, but we also need to do a better job by ourselves of using methods that actually help to protect that information that is on those systems. Some folks have wondered, what is it about this why is this different than it ever used to be, and what is it? And I have to share with you, most recently the Department of the Navy put out a report, and in the report, it just came out, it's about 80-some pages long, and it was an unclassified report, but the Department of the Navy went through and looked at their own systems with regard to cybersecurity. Secretary Spencer has been challenged on it. He's been criticized for what they found. I actually found it enlightening, and I found it refreshing that someone in Washington would say, we're going to actually lay out for the public how serious the challenges of cybersecurity are. And in it, one of the most critical things that I think they established was this. What do you think of when you think of the Navy? You think of ships, right? We're building a 355-ship Navy. And people talk about that all the time. And we talk about the security of those ships. And there's a system in place to protect every one of those ships. You ever hear of anybody ever stealing a Navy ship? Doesn't happen. But what about the information that they have? On a regular basis, we hear about people that are getting into our systems and stealing information. Why? Ships you can build, ships you can take a picture of, you can find blueprints on, you can duplicate, you can find a way around it. Information is extremely valuable. Proprietary information that you have is valuable. What we have to do is change the culture in our businesses and change the culture within our country of what is valuable. It's knowledge. You see, what we have on computer systems is knowledge. What the Navy had to remember was within their culture, they were designed to protect ships. Now they have to change to a culture in which they recognize the importance of the information that they have as well. That, to me, is a culture change that we all need to see. You see, what Secretary Spencer did was you could have replaced in this report the Department of the Navy, you could have put in the Department of the Army, the Department of the Air Force, you could have named any one of them, and they would have all had the same problems. The difference was a couple of months ago, the Department of the Navy got caught. What happened is they have lots of contractors, and some of their contractors, using open source information, had on unclassified systems material that when added together could be considered classified about our nuclear attack submarines. And other countries were able to get to that. And in doing so, it compromised our advanced knowledge in certain areas. That was extremely valuable to the Chinese, as an example. So what he did was he went back in and looked at this thing, trying to figure out what it is and how we go about protecting all this stuff. But any one of our different departments of the government could have the same thing. And I would suggest to you that whether it's your business, you don't leave your front door open. You make darn sure that anybody that's got a key to it takes care of it. You report missing keys. There's a sense of understanding about how critical your information at your site is. But if somebody really wants to steal something now, they're not going to come in and try to steal at night. What they're going to do is they're going to go into your computer systems and gather proprietary data. That's what this is all about. It's a change in the way that we look at what is valuable in our own businesses. So for me, I just wanted to go through a couple of items that we're doing at the national level and what we're trying to do to change this. We have within the Department of Defense, we've created a new command. It's called the U.S. Cyber Command. And my role as the chairman of the subcommittee is to work with them to try to make sure they have the materials and the tools that they need, but also to make sure that our public policy is such that we don't hinder them in their job of protecting information, and also working so that we don't just protect the DOD and the Department of Defense Information Network, but also the rest of the federal government network, but then also the reason why they're there in the first place, which is to help protect the information and systems that belong to Americans within the United States. If you ask someone on the street today who's responsible for protecting their system, and remember, the system, as we move closer and closer to the Internet of Things, it may very well be the transportation system, could be the energy system, could be communications. You name it, it has computers in it. Who's responsible for protecting that? And who are we protecting it from? You've got bad actors out there. You've got literally thieves, very professional thieves that know how to get in, and they're in to take money. But you've also got a different group of people, which are our adversaries, near peer, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, that are in, some for malicious purposes, simply to cause problems for us, some testing to find out where the weaknesses are that could be used at a time of conflict, and others because we have all of this information out there. And it's a whole lot easier for them to get the information from us than it is for them to try to find it themselves. The Chinese, as an example, have in their culture, they've never recognized that anybody could ever own an idea. Their culture doesn't recognize that. What their culture says is it's an idea. Nobody owns it. Well, we copyright things. We patent things. We consider it proprietary information. We consider it intellectual property. China doesn't have that in their culture. So as we've talked to the Chinese ambassador, he says, you have to understand our culture. To us, our people, they see that as just information, and you might have it, but if they can get it from you, that's our problem, not theirs. And so China, as an example, comes back in and is constantly trying to get in and find proprietary information. And they're very good at it. They're not trying to let you know that they're there. They're simply trying to very quietly get information that could be helpful for them. Not necessarily this year or next year, but in the future. And as we move our way through this process, they are gathering data constantly that they can, as they assimilate it, as they bring it all together, using quantum computing capabilities that are not something of the future, they're here today. They can gather and make decisions about what we're doing based on all of the information that they gather about all of us. And perhaps a fairer way of putting it is all of that information that we gather about us that we think is secret or can't be picked up. So today, the fact that you're here and the fact that you're a part of this, if I can share nothing else with you, I just want to leave you with this thought that, number one, this is real, that it is not something that's going to happen to somebody else. I can almost promise you that if you have a computer system, somebody is trying to get in many cases just to either, number one, see if they can, or because they're checking to see if you have information that could be of value to them that you may not even recognize as such. Or can they, with a latency, a delayed program, be able to get in and find a way to lift from you items of value, including funds from bank accounts and so forth. The Armed Services Committee has set up this cyber subcommittee because we've recognized that there are 5 domains that we have to protect now. Air, land, and sea, which all of you are familiar with. And then you have space, and then you have cyberspace. What our adversaries are doing is rather than spending their money in air, land, and sea, they're going directly to cyber because it's one way in which they can less expensively get information or less expensively limit our capabilities in the other areas by trying to limit or impact our defense systems or our offensive systems. So in the last 5 years, there's been changes, and I'll just give you a very brief update, and then I'll open it up for questions. I think I've got just a few minutes left. We started by making some changes between Congress and the White House. First of all, we've laid out within the National Defense Authorization Act a requirement that as we move forward, there'll have to be a definition of what constitutes cyber war or war in the cyber realm. It's not that easy to do. But nonetheless, we have to have a focus on it and a recognition within our public policy that you can cause a war by what you do within the domain of cyber. Second of all, under President Obama, he had attempted to put together a plan in which our defenses could respond to aggression from outside of the United States. He created a thing called PPD 20, Presidential Policy Directive 20, in which he laid out the format in which, using an advisory from the Cyber Command out to all of the other areas of government, they could clear the way so that they could do offensive cyber operations, to literally go on out and knock out the cyber missile launcher before they could come into the United States with a cyber attack. That kind of a concept. In 5 years, it never worked. And the reason why it didn't work is because it required, or it allowed, any other entity, the State Department or the Treasury Department or anybody else, to veto it, to slow it down, to stop it. Under John Bolton, who's the advisor, the security advisor to President Trump, that's been changed. They actually turned it around, and they put in what they call NSPM 13, National Security Policy Memorandum 13, which modifies that and now lays out a clear and delineated line of how we go about creating a chance for cyber to be utilized effectively, but still with safeguards and side rails on it. I would point out that in 2016, our elections were hacked by the Russians, no question about it. They did come in, they tried to influence us with propaganda, not in the newspapers so much, but by trying to get people from different points of view to argue with one another, thinking that they had lots of support for their rather radical ideas. And they did it not because they believed in one side or the other of any of the issues that divide us as Americans, but because they knew that if they promoted both sides, they could create conflict. And that's what their goal was. And they tried that on a number of occasions in 2016, and they were successful in doing so. In 2018, it did not happen. And it did not happen. The reason why it did not happen isn't because Russia gave up. It's because it was not by accident that Russia was stopped from doing it. And it was a clear policy victory for U.S. Cyber Command in what they were able to do. And so all I can share with you on that subject is at the top levels of the government, they have recognized how critically important cyber defenses are and cyber offensive capabilities are. And it is an evolving field, but it's one in which people that are in business don't have access to the offensive capabilities. You can't go out and get somebody who's trying to get in. What you can do is what we're trying to do within the Department of Defense and throughout all of government, and that is to make it very, very expensive for somebody to get into your system. Hygiene, cyber hygiene, where you make sure that you've got your employees knowing what they do, stopping them from opening up the phishing emails, a clear set, simple things to do, but that have got to be followed rigorously. And then if something does get in, having the appropriate security systems installed so that it can be detected as soon as possible, a decision can be made on how to fix it as soon as possible, and then you have the resources to clear it out of your system before it gets in and invades other parts of it. Those are the items that I would simply leave you with, that this is not going to be a one-time deal. It's going to be ongoing, and as long as we are an information-based society, we're going to have people trying to steal that information. You've got a lot of real valuable stuff, but the most important thing that you have within your business is the information that you have. It's your knowledge, and it's the stuff that you've got about other people that are on your business systems. Now, with that, have I got a few minutes for questions, or am I one or two? Okay. Is there anything?
Senator, just wanted to have you talk a little bit about workforce and what you're seeing in cybersecurity around the country, here in South Dakota, how we can create partnerships as business leaders as well, if you're seeing things you'd want to comment in that area.
Thanks, Mark. Look, I should have said something about this earlier. you've got here within South Dakota a real asset. At Dakota State University, DSU has a series of centers of excellence that have been recognized at the federal level. They're one of 2 universities in the entire nation that are as adept at cybersecurity as anybody else. And the NSA has a presence. The Department of Defense has a presence there. And the reason is because these are bright young kids. They can graduate 1,300 kids a year. The idea that we've got long-term for Dakota State, that we are building, with the help of Denny Sanford and the state of South Dakota, we're building a SCIF, which is basically a place where you can have sensitive information that you can hold confidential, but be able to communicate from there out into to the rest of the Department of Defense and so forth. And these young people, they either are going to be hired by somebody here in this state, or they're going to be hired by somebody somewhere else. You got first shot at it. And these kids are as bright and as well-trained as anybody in the entire country. They're also coordinating. There will be coordinated efforts with the other universities in the area. As we move forward, there will be a 5G system set up within this part of the state of South Dakota as one of the first areas that will include Brookings, Sioux Falls, Madison, and so forth. But these young people, they're going to be as sharp at cybersecurity as anybody in the entire country is. And you've got 1,300 of them that are there in the system that'll be coming out. And if you wait until they graduate, it's too late, because they're going to be, as Mark knows, they're going to be sought after, and they are right now. But you've got a real asset base there. Professionals are going to be in demand. What we're hoping to be able to do is to share them between business and government. At the Cyber Command level, we're going to try to set up reserve systems and National Guard units there so that these kids, as they come through, if they want to, be involved in both. Because there's something exciting about defending your country, about being in at the cutting edge on those offensive and defensive capabilities. But at the same time, to be able to work back here in this part of the country and to actually have the added impetus of continuing education through cyber activities in the private businesses, that's huge. And to have those networks. What we'd like to do is to have both. You're part of that. And so if you would consider looking at these young people for your cyber professionals, I think it's a win-win situation all the way around. But there's about 1,300 a year that are coming out of that, and it's going to grow. It's going to grow. But I'm probably out of time. Let me just say this. Thank you. And once again, thanks for the opportunity to share with you. Remember, what they want is your knowledge. And the way that they're getting that knowledge right now is to try to steal it out of your systems. And if you would lock your door, you should be locking your systems as well. Thank you.